props. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared, if you haven't met me yet. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight is testimony. Testimony is a very common thing that we talk about within the church. But everybody's testimony is very different. It's very powerful both ways. So if you have met my wife, her and I's life are very different. And very different is probably kind of the nice way of putting that. I mean, we were polar opposites of background, of faith. Off. Oh, there it comes back on. Richard's just messing with me. So rude. I know you do. But every testimony of what God has done in life and is doing and hopes to will be done is a powerful thing. So tonight I'm going to share with you my testimony of what God has done, where God has taken me, and how I actually kind of ended up here with you guys, because it truly is a God thing how I ended up here with you guys. So I grew up a very split home. I grew up actually here. I say here. I grew up at Grand Prairie, off Gray Southwest. I was born at Arlington Memorial, which is where my wife has been working for the last couple of years, which is funny for us. But my father, my biological father, was not a believer, or is not a believer, I should say. He's still alive. He is not a believer. He, my entire life, has been a drug addict. He grew marijuana in our backyard, and so there was plants in the backyard, and I just thought that was normal. Meth was in our house from a very young age. I just thought that was normal. And my mother was a very strong believer, but my whole life she's had cancer, or had cancer, so I don't have memory of my mother with her not being sick. So I kind of grew up in this weird culture of we go to church with mom, but my dad treats us another way. You hear about God being a good father, but my father beat the living tar out of us, both physically and verbally. So my most of my childhood is fairly traumatic. That is not a word I like to use, but I've been beaten. I've seen my mother been beaten, my sister. I became first name basis with police officers because they were at our house so often. My dad hit me with an AK-47 one time, took the buttstock and popped me with it. And so the idea of having God being good was kind of a weird concept to me. It was, dude, you're such a jerk. It was a really odd concept because my dad was very focused on sending my sister and I to private school, to Christian school, even though he didn't believe in it. He just thought it would be better for us in the long term. But it was really weird for him to say, this is more important for you, but for me it means absolutely nothing. And he was very open about that. And so my mother really still kind of drug us to church. We kind of bounced around from two places. We ended up at Matthew Road Baptist Church when I was 7. And we kind of hung out there for a few years before it got really bad between my mother and I. And my dad went to work one day. And you hear about these stories all the time where like the dad leaves and then you pack everything up and you run away. That was our story. My dad left for work, and within an hour we packed up all of our stuff and drove to Oklahoma, where my side of the family is from. Is this just a bad microphone? I'm not going to blame you for that one. Oh, I'm covering. This is my fault, not your fault. It's my fault. I apologize. It is my fault, Richard, not yours. That's right. That's right. I've been praying a lot about humility and to be more humble, so there you go. Be careful what you pray for. That's tonight's lesson. Be careful what you pray for. It will happen. So we did leave my dad when I was 7. We lived in Oklahoma for a while. And in my faith, we went to church every Sunday when we were there, but I would sit in the car because I didn't want to be a part of it. Because my experience was we sing these wonderful songs, we talk about God's love, we talk about God's grace, and all I have felt my whole life is this adrenaline pump to run, and to hide. Because I've been beaten, I've been watching other people get beat. Drugs are just prominent in my home 24/7. And so we eventually did move back, and within about 3 months of us moving back, my dad actually he disappeared. So by the time I was 10, we had run away, come back, and now he's just gone. And at the time, being 10 years old, kind of just figuring out what that meant. And okay, now that I felt like at least he was there, and now he's not there, and this constant battle of what does this all mean for me. By the time I was 13, I was cutting myself and already suicidal. My sister also struggled with those things. We weren't really involved in church. We attended Matthew Road still sometimes on Sundays. But my mother had also started to get more and more sick. My mother had breast cancer and MS, which is very debilitating at times, and she had very severe cases of both. And so I just remember all these times asking these questions of, if God loves us so much, why is there this difficulty here? And where is this pain and this hope that we keep hearing about? Where is it going to come from? And then finally, the youth pastor at our church reached out to us, and we started kind of going. His name is Rusty. I'll never forget about Rusty. Rusty is one of my biggest mentors, one of my biggest supporters. We still talk a little bit today. He lives in Kansas City now. But he really kind of walked through what that meant with me for the first time. Not that Matthew Road didn't have people within the church that try to do that, but at 13, you're like, what does that mean? What does that do? My experience with you is very different. But they put in a lot of effort, and they just assumed, because I went to a Christian school, I knew the right answers. They just assumed, hey, you're saved, all these things, blah, 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 blah. And then when there's a lot of stuff that happens before then that I'm going to leave out. But when I was 15, my mom got very sick. And I was very involved with church at this point, asking more questions, kind of come around to the idea of maybe this is true. But my mom got very sick, and in February of 2008, she comes home and goes, I have, probably about 2 years to live. Well, the next week it turned into 8 months. The next week it turned into 6 weeks. And the next week it was 2 weeks. And so that was the beginning of February. So by the time we got to March, it was maybe 2 weeks. And so on March 8th, she passed away at 5:40 in the morning in our house. And I sat there and I held her hand as she took her last breath and felt her let go. And that was a fairly traumatic moment in my life. I have one biological sister who also was in high school. I was a junior, and she was no, I was not a junior. I was a sophomore, and my sister was a senior in high school. She had just turned 18. I had just turned 16. And it was the first time that I was faced with this question of, no one's going to push me to do anything. If I wanted to walk away from this all, no one's going to think twice. If I show up to things, people are going to be happy about that, but really they have no ties to me whatsoever. And so it was about 12 hours later, 8 p.m. that night. It was dark, and I was just sitting in my mother's room. And it was the first time I had prayed, probably in a very long time. And I just heard a voice go, do you believe? Do you believe in me? Do you trust me to do what I said I do? It was the first time that I didn't have to fake it, because, again, who's going to care? Like, if I never showed up to church again, everyone probably would have understood and just been like, well, that's how life goes, and that's understanding. And if I did show up to church, they'd all be kind of excited, like, yeah, that'd be great. But for the most part, it was that moment where I was all alone, truly all alone. And I had to face the reality of, is God real? And if he is, what difference in my life does that make? Or do I just go on and do my own thing? So I spent a lot of time that day. I don't think I slept for 2 or 3 days, asking myself the question and praying to God, going, if you're real, how do I follow you in this? Knowing the right answers is one thing, right? Everyone knows, for the most part, can know the right answers, but it can still go to hell. And that's probably the category I would say I was in at that time. Is I knew all the right answers. I could talk anybody's ear off. But I didn't know who God truly was at that moment. And so that was the time where I said, Lord, I want to follow. I want to follow you. And that is the point where God had saved my life. And I just remember breaking down and crying, go, how does someone so empty have life again? Because again, like at 16, no dad, no mom, nothing. You know my sister, so don't take that as a negative thing. She currently goes to Matthew Road, so she knows my sister. My sister is a wonderful lady, But at the time, like, again, 18-year-old, 6-year-old in a house on your own, can you imagine the chaos you could get into with two teenagers by themselves at a house? Think of every wrong thing you could do. That happened. Because again, I knew the right answers, but I had no one really to walk with me. And when people said, hey, how's school going? I said, good. And everyone went, well, that's good. How else were they going to know? They just took me at my word. And so 6 months passed, and in September, my lung collapsed. And not like, oh, your lung collapsed and when you did this. My lung collapsed on a Friday. I didn't go to the hospital until Saturday. So I had 14 hours of 7 broken ribs, 4 on this side. And basically what happened was my lungs started to fill with blood. So I literally was drowning in my own blood at that point. And so there used to be a free clinic in Fort Worth that you could go to. And they checked scans. They're like, oh, something's wrong. And I was like, yeah, I broke my ribs. I already knew that. But what happened was we heard a bunch of people running down the hallway. We're like, man, that sounds terrifying. I wonder who they're coming to get. Not realizing it was me. And then all of a sudden I get thrown onto a gurney, and everyone's like, it's going to be great. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay, which that means this is going to go poorly. You're about to be in a lot of pain. This is not going to go well for you. And that's exactly what happened. They literally started just shooting me up with needles, and they said, you're about to go to sleep. We're going to put a tube in your side. You're going to wake up, and it's going to hurt really bad. And then I passed out. And then I did wake up with a tube in my side. So I got to carry around a bucket for a week and a half and stay in the hospital. And I'll show you a gnarly picture one day because it's super gross. But yeah, I just basically had a tube. I can't show it now. I'd have to find it. But yeah, there's a picture of me, and I'm literally just holding a bucket, and not like a silver open bucket because that's unsanitary and unsafe and not helpful. But like a plastic box, and you can just see it's just slowly filling up with my blood. And I just remember picking it up every so often, and being like, that's bad. I could die. And so it was really funny. I was a few hours away from actually suffocating. And so this moment where, I think, what else could go wrong? I'll follow after God and everything will be better. I'm not literally on my deathbed, but I'm pretty daggum close. When I was in the hospital, there was a verse. I had a lot of time because, when your lung collapse and that happens, you know what you can't do? You can't go outside. Do you know why? Because Texas is super humid. You know what happens to collapsed lungs when they get reflated? Well, humidity pushes them back down. So they went, you can go outside. This is going to happen again, and it's going to hurt worse. So I spent the next 3 months sitting inside by myself because it was horrible. But there's this verse, if this would work, coming out of James. Oh, it's broken. Look at there. It's coming out of James chapter 1. And at this point, I had never read James, at least in my memory. James chapter 1, it opens basically in this manner. It says this, count it all joy, my brothers, various trials, or trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That verse made me look at trials very differently. That verse made me look at my life quite differently. When God goes, count it joy when you meet various trials, because it is completing the faith that you have. That changed what was going on in my life. It changed some of my perspective. The difficulty was a 16-year-old on morphine and a lot of other opioids typically probably ends poorly, and it does. So me trying to figure this out, I ended up getting on an opioid addiction. And so I kept doing this roller coaster of up and down of I'm seeking who God is, something happens. I'm seeking who God is, something happens. I'm seeking who God is, and something happens. And again, that was nobody's fault. That was a 16-year-old who was in charge of his own meds, and obviously you go, I feel better when I take this meds with a collapsed lung, and you just develop a problem. But I kept thinking about this verse for a few years, all the way up. My senior year of high school, I had to write a paper, and I wrote it actually on trials and through the book of James about experiencing various trials and what the Lord does within those trials. And what I've learned through the trials is when you find true joy and there's true hope. It doesn't make your life perfect. I would love to say by the time I got to college, I was a great human being. I was not in any way, shape, or form. I still struggled for a very long time. I had an unhealthy relationship with drugs. Which there's not really a healthy relationship with drugs. I had a very unhealthy relationship with women. I was very unhealthy already before I met Jesus, but post Jesus, I still really struggled with that. I experienced a lot more guilt and understanding of what was happening and what God said, why sex was important and why it was meant for marriage. But it's hard to take somebody who has no responsibility towards these things and try to shift that culture. If you've ever come out of that type of culture, now some people get to do the wonderful experience of quitting drugs cold turkey, quitting sex cold turkey, and be like, I followed Jesus and I'm perfect now. That was not my experience. It was a fight. It was a fight for a very long time. To the point that I ran into a lot of deep depression because of it. To the point that I was on suicide watch. I was already working at a church at this point. I was 21. I was working at a church. I hit suicide watch. And I kept just asking, what does this trial bring forth? Right? How do I count this joy? I've lost my parents. I've almost lost my life. I've struggled with addiction. And now here I am, mentally unstable for long periods of time. What joy can I find through this trial? And so I finally went to counseling, ended up on medication for a couple of years, or for about a year. And it became more and more clear, part of the trials that I was going through was because my life, when I was growing up, in the area I was growing up, my life was not normal. My life became more normal for a lot of people. Because of those things, loss of parents, addiction, mistakes, the Lord has been able, he was able to use it beforehand, but because of that, the Lord has used me in different ways that maybe some others can't. I met my wife around this time. We always talk about this. My wife is perfect. I know I said that a couple Sundays ago, but I definitely mean it. My wife, her parents are church planners. She has 4 sisters. They're all saved. 4 out of the 5 husbands work at churches. She's never really doubted her faith. She's never gone crazy. I'm the only person she's ever kissed. I'm her only boyfriend her entire life. She has, I think the craziest thing she's ever done is stay up all night long. Yes, it was a lock-in. I think it was a lock-in at DBU, right? I think it was a lock-in at DBU. So, yeah, not just anyway. It was at a church lock-in. So even then, it wasn't even sketchy. It was like this is pretty safe. And so I remember when we first sat down, we started talking about our lives. Because at that point, my wife is 3.5 years younger than I am. And I just kind of laid it all out there. I was like, hey, this is who I am. This is where I've come from. This is God. This is what God's been teaching me. This is how God has been using me. I don't know what that looks like for the future, but I just want to put it out there. And she went, wow, my testimony was super boring compared to yours. And I just remember sitting there going, I would gladly trade years of my life to have a simple testimony. Because the power, in me, it took so long for me to realize God's goodness and to trust in God's goodness, where my wife went, God is good, and that's all I needed to know. And she was faithful to God's goodness and his calling on her life from a very young age, where my dumb butt wanted to run away forever and ever and ever and ever. So what the Lord actually did through that time was I was studying to be a physical therapist, and then I started taking fireman exams. And my youngest brother, my adopted brother, he looked at me one day and said, I think you should start, stop trying to do those other things. You're already working at a church. I think the Lord is calling you to pastor. And little did I know is that he was right, and I was just being stubborn. And so for the Lord to make another point, I blew out my left knee and tore up my left knee to the point where I couldn't run anymore. So it's hard to be a fireman if you can't run. It's kind of important to climb ladders and throw people over your shoulder and save them in a building. I did get to live out my fireman desire 2 years ago. My neighbor's house caught on fire, and I ran in, and I looked around. I was like, this is a bad idea. I'm going to go back outside because that was not helpful. So I got to live out that desire. But it really was, this Lord was just like, you've got to stop running. And so all these things and all these trials, I get to look back and go, man, I have found more ultimate joy in what God has done in my life through the mess, through the crud, than what I could ever imagine. At that point, I thought, I'm 21. I've already gone through all this crud. Like, I've paid dues. Like, I don't have to do this anymore. And I was very wrong. Romans 8:18 says, I do not consider the sufferings of the present time to be worthy in comparison to the glory that has yet to be revealed to us. When Christina and I got married, we thought everything was going to be perfect. One, we made $50,000 together, which we thought was a lot of money. $50,000 doesn't pay for jack. We found that out pretty quick. But we thought, man, our life is going to be great. And it was. We have experienced so many blessings. I started working at a place called Connect Church, which actually is a church that came out of Lake Church about 22 years ago now. We got to experience and learn a lot. We've got to invest in a lot of people. But we also got to experience more pain as adults than we ever thought we would. Church ministry is, one, not for the weak. Is mostly about 60% painful and 40% fun. And we experienced a lot of that. But the fun also outweighs the difficulty. And one of the things that the Lord really worked on us in that time as one together was walking in trust and not asking the why, but the what. We desired to have children. It took us 2 years to get pregnant. And when we got pregnant, right, you imagine, oh, this is awesome. We were so stoked. We went to the doctor's office, and they're like, oh, this is lovely, this is great. Do you want to tell them or should I? And we're like, what the crap are you talking about? They're like, you have twins. And I fainted. Christina's cried, I fainted. They sit me back up, they go, there may be triplets. And I then fainted again. It was not triplets. I would have been excited if we had triplets, but terrifying. So we're pumped, we're stoked. We're thinking 2 years of trial, of frustration, of pain, ease. Again, wrong. The next doctor's appointment, they go, hey, you have the second rarest type of twins called mono twins, which means they split late. It's a big ordeal. And they said, do not tell anyone you're having twins because one of them will die. That was our second conversation about kids. It became this point, and y'all will probably soon figure this out in the next few years. It's one, miscarriages happen so often, but they're very shameful, unintentionally. They're very shameful. And so I actually talked to y'all don't call him Dr. Nelson. I talked to Britt about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, this is what I was told. He goes, they told you the nice version. And it still was super hard for us. And so we really prayed about it. And, so my title here is discipleship pastor. And part of that is one of the reasons why Eric and I had a lot of conversations was transparency and vulnerability is a difficult thing to do in leadership. It's a very difficult to do thing, period. One of my big emphasis in life is transparency. So we decided to tell everyone, against our doctor's wishes, that our kids have a good chance of dying, but we want you to know that this is what we're going through. Part of it was we already had 2 friends who had miscarriages just a couple weeks prior. And so here we thought, count it all joy because it's the completing of your faith. Well, here's a way to walk in faith with somebody else. And so the theme of life became the shame, and hiding, to now shame and bringing it to light and overcoming it. And so for the next 4 months, basically, every week we had the church pray over us. Somebody at the church would come and pray over us. It cost us a lot to share that. It was very painful, still is very painful. Even though, I don't know if y'all have seen my kids are perfect. They're beautiful. They're best case, like dream scenario. They're like 10% of what actually happens in this scenario. But it was still really hard for us to really work through this. But we got to see the church be the church. And when God says, bear one another's burdens, we got to experience that in a whole new way beforehand. And with that, we even, Christina moved into the hospital 2.5 months prior before actually having the kids. So for 2.5 months, I had to drive to the hospital every day. Christina get checked 3 times a day. And every time Christina would call me, my heart would drop because I was like, is it happening? Because babies are viable at 25 weeks. We actually went to Ireland at 24 weeks. Don't do that. And I remember sitting down with our doctor. He's awesome. I love our doctor. And he said, you can go to Ireland. And we said, what's the negative? He goes, the negative is if it happens and you go into labor, whatever happens at this point is going to happen. They're not going to make it if you go to labor. The only benefit of you being here is we're here with you. And we took that risk. We got to see the church really pray and love on us in that way. And so through the trials, not only did I grow, not only did my wife grow, but the church grew. And we got to see something really change within a small group of people. When we got to see what does it mean for the Lord to really move in people's lives, we got to see it deeper, not just in our lives. We got to see something change in many, many, many others. So that was 2022, and we thought, man, we're in the right spot. We're in the perfect spot forever. And 2023 kind of rolled up, and something began to change. So we've got to see this theme of God really investing, implanting, and moving. And we thought, okay, we're finally done. I never wanted to leave my last church. I love Connect Church. I still talk to many of those people. But in October of 23, something changed, and it was the first time I went, I think my time here is ending. Christine and I started praying about it. We let a couple of people in to start praying about it. And at this point, I've been the youth pastor. I was the next gen pastor, which made it a college and adult ministry. I became the associate pastor, which is what Pastor Olis and I do, but together. And I thought, man, we're good. We're done. We're not moving for a long time. And as the Lord really kind of opened this door and began to soften my heart and go, hey, it's time for you to go. It was about a 6-month process of really working through some of that stuff. Of what this looks like. And at this time, Christina had gotten pregnant again with James. And so this kind of led us to a lot of questions about what's next. And Pastor Eric and I would get lunch once a month just to catch up because I was going through some stuff that he understood. He occasionally would just make jokes like, hey, one day you're going to come hang out with us. One day you're just going to come hang out with us. In November, when I told him that we had been praying about what's next, he goes, I know what's next. Have you thought about this? Have we thought about this position? And I said, no, I don't really want to do that. I'm not ready to leave just yet. And he goes, why don't you just pray about it? So we prayed about it. And Christina said, we're going to pray for 3 things. One thing you should know about my wife, if my wife prays, the Lord hears her. And I'm not joking. Like for whenever I need an answer, I go, can you pray for this thing? And it comes up. Because the prayer of a righteous person, the Lord hears and honors. So when in doubt, ask Christine to pray for you. Unless you don't want the answer, don't ask her to do that because it'll come. And so she said, we're going to pray for these 3 things together. And we did. And a month later, I met with Pastor Eric, and he said, hey, I'm thinking about this. And then he listed the 3 things that we had been praying about, and he had no idea that's what we were talking about together. And I knew, cool, my time at Connect is done. And that was a big mourning period for us. And we had decided, because Pastor Eric did not offer me the job here at that time. We were still just kind of talking about it. And so we were praying, we were fasting over this for a while. And so we ended up leaving a year ago, last week, leaving Lake Connect Church. And I left with a pregnant wife who was about to give birth, who also just quit her job. And I was quitting my job with no promise of any other job. But the Lord called us to step out in faith and in difficulty and go, embrace the suffering because it's the complete of your faith. And lovingly, very quickly, Pastor Eric got a hold of me. He offered me a job. We ended up saying yes, coming here. And it's been a wonderful experience since then. It has been the roller coasters, as some of y'all can imagine. But the one thing that I can always tell people through my testimony of what the Lord has done, is doing, and will do, is that through the ups and downs, he goes, when you read that verse, count all these trials as joy because of the completing of your faith. There's nothing more comforting than those two sentences. Because the Lord goes, you will be okay, you will be safe, and I will reign over your life. And I have found more purpose and fulfillment than any drug I've ever taken, anyone I've ever slept with, any whatever I want to do, than I have in just sitting in the rest of who God is. And that's easy to say, and it sounds really pretty. I would love to go into more detail and tell you how unpretty that really was. And honestly, some of the things I still struggle with because of that. I still deal, I've lived in this area most of my entire life, so my wife and I still run into a lot of my old friends. And you want to talk about shame that comes over in that moment, especially when it's a female that I may have not done the best things with, and I have to introduce, this is my wife, random lady, to her. But I also get to then share the wonderful work that the Lord has done in my life and how much he has changed me. Not how much I have changed myself, but how much the Lord has changed me. One of the things that Matthew Road was wonderful about, and where the church really loved well, is there was a group of people that knew who me and my sister was, who basically said, we won't make it past 21. There was a group of about 15 people, and I didn't know this for a long time, that prayed over that all the time. So when you wonder if your prayers matter, they do. When you're wondering if your suffering matters, it does. When you wonder if difficulty, questions, does the church really matter? You may not always know it, but it does. And sometimes the church will hurt you. It has hurt me a ton, unintentionally. But I often see and recognize that their prayers came with that, and that their desire is good, and that the Lord has been moving in those things. And so the testimony I give you is that through those ups and downs, the Lord remains faithful all the time. You're not going to understand it. Y'all are at kind of this really pivotal aspect in your early 20s, late teens, early 20s, where you're going to begin to ask more and more questions because you're seeing things no longer as a teenager, not as a high schooler, where you're like, oh, this is great. And when all else fails, you just go, TJ, where it's like, oh, I'm an adult. There's an expectation. There are things that I do understand. There are things I don't understand. And how do I handle those things? And where does my trust fall in? Does it fall into the individual of TJ, myself, Pastor Eric, the Harrises, go on, so on and so forth of your leaders? Or does it fall into who God is and his character? The dependence on who God is where you're going to start needing to lean on more and more and more. Not that you shouldn't have already been doing that, but you're about to experience a whole new way to experience God's character. Because again, eventually, especially as you graduate college, no one's going to hold your hand. No one's going to text you and be like, hey, what are you doing? Da-da-da. Because it changes because of adulthood and responsibilities and all those different things. Not that anyone doesn't love you anymore, but there becomes this hope and expectation of you have to own your faith. None of us can live it for you. Because if we're living it for you, you have no faith in who God is. You just hope that we will take care of you and that we are righteous enough. And I will tell you this, I will fail you. Pastor will fail you. Jeremy will fail you. Sean will fail you. I'll go through all of the leaders, and I will tell you they will all fail you at some point. But that doesn't negate the love or care that they have. It doesn't negate the love or care that God has for you. So count all of your trials as joy. Find rest in who God is, and bear one another's burdens. Romans 12. When you go home, because it's already late, y'all college students, what does it matter to you guys? It's early for you. I have 3 kids, man. I am like dragging. Go read Romans 12. Romans 12 is one of my favorite passages, like a whole chapter in Scripture, because it talks about the character of who the believer is and the responsibility of who we are as believers. And one of those is to bear one another's burdens, to rejoice with those who rejoice, and to weep with those who weep. Follow after God well. Let me pray for you guys. God, we just thank you for a group committed, a church committed, who care and who love and who desire to seek the best out of all of us. God, we're thankful for your word and how you transform lives. Holy Spirit, we ask that you come tonight, that you lead us out, that you go before us, that you change us in who we are. That we rely on you all the more. And Father, that church would not be a place, but it'd be a people who love and care and pray over one another. And we ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.